As we cover the latest on COVID, we're also marking the start of another major pandemic, a public health crisis with a devastating toll. The first case of the disease that became known as AIDS, first reported 40 years ago this month. And for years, it was seen as a death sentence. For more than 700,000 Americans, it was. Now, it's a different story, thanks to medical treatments and important public campaigns giving those newly diagnosed hope for a fuller life. NBC's Joe Fryer is looking at how we got here. Joe, it is great to see you this morning. And I think for people who weren't, conscious of this 40 years ago, it's tough to understand the fear, the questions, the initial response from national leaders. Nothing like what we saw with, the public health crisis we're going through right now.
Yeah, a completely different picture, Hallie. It was June 5th, 1981, when the first 5 cases of a mysterious illness were first reported, an illness that would later become known as AIDS. This morning, we want to reflect on 4 decades of pain and progress.
We sat down with 4 gay men from 4 different generations, all living with HIV. The oldest is Jesse Mylan, who's still haunted by the beginning of the epidemic.
People who, because they had been diagnosed, suddenly disappeared. And we all knew what that silence meant.
At the time, many leaders were accused of ignoring the crisis because it was deemed a gay disease. President Reagan didn't give his first major speech on AIDS until 1987, 6 years after the first diagnosed case.
We must have a definition of AIDS.
For Dr. Anthony Fauci, the epidemic was a turning point. In 1984, he became the nation's top infectious disease expert, the same job he holds today.
When there is resistance, was it hard to get the resources you needed?
Well, in the beginning, it was. I mean, we were trying to convince people that this was not something that was going to go away. This is something that was going to get worse and worse.
In 1995, a combo therapy known as the AIDS cocktail was ushered in, followed by even better medications offering hope. But there was no cure for the stigma.
Right now, there are millions of people with HIV suffering from social rejection because they and other people believe that they're infectious, and they're not.
Diagnosed in 2003, Bruce Richmond says he was terrified of giving HIV to someone else.
So I didn't love. I isolated myself. I was depressed, and at times I was suicidal.
But then he learned medication could reduce his viral load to undetectable levels, meaning he couldn't transmit the virus. So Bruce started an advocacy group and coined the phrase U equals U, undetectable equals untransmittable, a message endorsed by the CDC.
It gave me hope. It meant that I could be intimate. People with HIV can live healthy lives and not pass on the virus to anyone, and that's a revolution.
Today, about 38,000 Americans are still diagnosed each year. DeAndre Moore was 19. Remember staring at a window covered in butterfly stickers.
In that moment, all I could think was, damn, if I could be one of those butterflies and just fly away from here, then everything is going to be okay.
Raif Darazi had a similar reaction. He was 27.
So I knew next to nothing about what it meant to be diagnosed with HIV. It was a steep learning curve.
And what did you learn?
Well, I learned that I'm not going to die. I'm alive and well.
As for an HIV/AIDS vaccine, well, that hasn't happened yet. But Hallie, Dr. Fauci tells me that he is cautiously optimistic that someday we will have a vaccine that is successful.
Joe Fryer, really incredible and important reporting. Thank you so much for bringing that to us. We appreciate it. Sure. We're going to make